So my name is Chris Neidl. I'm the India Program Manager for ARC Finance. I'm based in Pune in Maharashtra, and happy to be here for the week, and also happy to be the moderator for this panel and also the following panel on crowdfunding. We've got a great group of people here. We're going to have an interesting conversation. The subject is on pay-as-you-go models, which relates directly to many of the themes and subjects that have been raised in each of the panels today, namely, or most significantly, the affordability barrier that needs to be overcome for end users, making improved energy options more affordable. Pay-as-you-go, as we know, is strongly associated with the mobile sector. It doesn't only allow customers to prepay for service, but it also affords some level of flexibility that allows customers to determine how much they want to buy and at what frequency. And that formula has proved revolutionary for low-income folks whose incomes are not only small, but also often irregular and inconsistent. So in the last few years, we've seen a number of different startups that have been working to see how pay-as-you-go can have a similar disruptive or revolutionary influence in the energy space, introducing pay-as-you-go as a model for energy access. As we'll see in this presentation, we're going to really talk to these three entrepreneurs about their businesses, about the nuts and bolts and how it works, about the business models, about their technology. And through that, we'll find out immediately there's an enormous amount of diversity that we see with PayGo with energy. And that's, again, well represented on this panel. What I am going to do, I think, because this is an afternoon panel, make it a bit more participatory, maybe from an earlier stage, and I'll take some audience questions actually as we go. I'm going to ask some questions up front that really sort of establish so you understand the businesses, and then we'll take a question from the audience and then proceed that way. So let me go ahead. The bios of all of our panelists are, again, in the program, so you can read those. But today we're joined immediately to my left, Lesley Marincola, who's the founder and CEO of Angaza Design. Wanda Halbert, who's the marketing manager for Azuri Technologies, and Mitra Ardron, who's the CEO and founder of Lumeter Networks. So we'll go ahead and get started, but I think a great place to start would be just to very concisely, if each of you can give us sort of a 1-minute encapsulation of the company, the market that you're operating in, and what you're trying to do. And start with Lesley.
Great, thanks. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Lesley Marincola, and I'm the founder and CEO of Angaza. We're actually an American company based out of San Francisco, and we have a team in Kenya as well. So we're mostly focused on East Africa, where we actually have our operations. And we consider ourselves a technology company at our core. We've developed a pay-as-you-go technology that we're embedding in a variety of different types of solar products. And the pay-as-you-go technology, again, Chris mentioned, flexibility. We give flexibility to our customers to pay as much or as little for energy at one time as they can. And we use a rent-to-own model where once they reach a certain price point on a solar home system, that final payment actually unlocks the system and it's theirs to use for free. So we're actually very focused on low-cost pay-as-you-go. We actually transfer data with audio tone sequences. So it sounds very much like R2-D2 is the best sort of analogy I can give. But by using this data transfer mechanism over a voice channel, we can actually both send payment information to solar home systems and also receive usage and diagnostic data back from solar home systems to tell an individual customer exactly, we can understand exactly how they're using that product. So just to give a context of what types of products we're looking at, this is a 3-watt, sort of mid-tier, entry-level solar product. It has a bright LED light on the front, and it charges mobile phones as well. So this would normally retail for about $45, and we sell it for actually a little bit over that because you account for the risk of pay-as-you-go in there. So this has our pay-as-you-go technology embedded inside of it.
Great. Wanda, is that working for you?
Is that working? Thanks. Thanks, Chris. Wanda from Azuri Technologies. We're a British company based in Cambridge. Some of you may remember a company called 819, based in Cambridge. We started out with Indigo back in September 2011 with the first deployments of our pay-as-you-go solar home system. And then due to the success of the product, we decided in August last year to spin out the company company spin out the technology and business model into a new company called Azuri. So it's been the same team, same product, everything stayed the same, but it's allowed us to grow. And 819 continues to develop printed plastic solar. So our target market is primarily sub-Saharan Africa. So we have now in 9 different countries in East Africa, Southern Africa, and also now in West Africa as well. The product is here. I've got it here. It's basically a small solar home system with 2 LED lights, and the customer can also charge their mobile phone as well. And there's a small 2.5-watt solar panel. And the battery and technology is inside this distinctive yellow indigo box. And simply how it works is the customer buys one of our indigo scratch cards once a week for typically around 18 months. And then after that period, they can choose to buy out the product, so through our rent-to-own model, or they can choose to upgrade to a larger product, which will have full lights and radio and mobile charging as well. So we found fantastic uptake of our product, and we're working with local partners to ensure that it's distributed and installed properly in people's homes.
Hi, so Mitra Ardron from Lumeter. So we exist because great companies like these two have pioneered the way ahead of us, and there's hundreds more companies that would like to be doing what they do. So we've developed a prepayment platform that we sell to renewable energy companies that want to integrate it into mini-grids, into solar home systems, into charge controllers and stuff like that. It consists of 2 components. It consists of meters. This is the mini-grid version. There's a smaller version that sits inside solar home systems, and a chipset that sits inside charge controllers, and they're all controlled by an infrared controller, since we're all talking about how we get codes into them. So we sell, as I said, we sell that to renewable energy companies. We're business model agnostic. Our back end could handle either a rent-to-own model or a pure service model. We've been at conferences where people have passionately argued both those models on the same day in different countries for different contexts, whether people need to buy a product or whether they want to buy a service. So we're agnostic about that. We've got trials in Peru, in Zambia, and just made some sales in India. And yeah, we can.
Yeah. So one of the things that you just touched upon there is that product facilitating ownership or a mechanism for ongoing services. So that's one important distinction that PayGo applied to energy, how it differs from the mobile phone sector, which is primarily driven by payments for ongoing service. I'm curious though, because obviously mobile has been the principal inspiration and reference point, I would say, for energy companies that do want to apply the PayGo model, replicating the success and the scale that's been achieved there. But it is very, very different. So I'm wondering if we could just first sort of talk a little bit about what lessons really, or what elements of the mobile model can really be instructional, or can really be copied and pasted, or be a model for the energy sector, and how is energy different maybe where that doesn't apply. So I wonder if we can go ahead and start with Lesley.
Sure. So, I mean, I think the big similarity there is just, again, flexibility of payments, because the reason mobile really penetrated across the African countries is that you can purchase airtime in however many shillings you want to purchase at one time. So if you only have 10 shillings, 15 cents at one time, you can only purchase 10 shillings of airtime. Or if you want to put 1,000 shillings in your phone, you can do that as well. So I think this flexibility of mobile has really been applied to the energy space. But I'd say it's actually very different, because speaking of mobile, you just buy a mobile phone and you're no longer financing that hardware of the phone over time. You're just purchasing airtime, which there's no financing involved there. It's a very different story when you're talking about actually selling a piece of hardware like this below cost to the customer and expecting them to pay that over time. So I think sort of, default rates are this unspoken nemesis in the pay-as-you-go space. No one really knows what default rates are, because it's a pretty new space as well. But I'd say it's very easy to sell a product for $5 up front. It's much, much harder to actually ensure that that product gets paid off over a year plus. So there's a lot of challenges that the energy space brings that the mobile space hasn't really seen, and just that financing, that continued customer repayment. Because to be honest, shit happens in these markets. People move, people die, unfortunately. These products are passed to other family members. And it's very actually hard to keep track of it. So one of the big things that we're trying to do with pay-as-you-go is to make it all cloud-based, all automated, integrate with mobile money, so you're not really reliant on, you can bring it to any part of the country and still use that product and make top-ups on that product. And just one last thing I'd say on this point is that, you know, I think mobile really took off because there was just this inherent value add that people saw of owning a cell phone. So I think the big question for the energy space is how do you make owning a solar product as just aspirational and attractive as owning a mobile phone? And owning a mobile phone is much more than just having a voice conversation with someone. It's getting access to mobile money. It's, you know, getting access to even the internet on your phone. So there's a bunch of functionality that comes along with owning a mobile phone. So we're thinking a lot about how do you replicate that just inherent drive to want to own that product in the energy space.
If anybody else wants to, otherwise we can.
I'd add one thing to that. I mean, there's a big similarity between this and mobile phone that's different from prepaid and solar lanterns. With a solar lantern, if you want to add to the amount of power you're using, you've got to buy a second one. You've got to increase your expenditure by 100%. With prepaid, as we all know, people work their way up an energy ladder, and it doesn't mean you go from 1 unit of energy to 2. So going from 1 to 1.2 to 1.4 means buying a few more credits on a payment system, or paying off you know, a solar home system quicker so you can move on to something else. The other big difference with mobile is this is a highly regulated space. So in many cases, there's both a preferred business model from the customer's perspective, which may be buying a system or buying power, and then there's a preferred model from the point of view of fitting in with whatever bureaucrat you have to deal with. So in some countries, it's not legal to sell power unless you're selling it at, you know, 10 cents per kilowatt hour, which is below the cost of producing it. So then people find all kinds of tricks to enable them to effectively sell power to people. Sell them a system over time, or sell the system to a co-op, which then sells power to its own members, things like that. And that's very different from the mobile phone space, which basically cut it from scratch.
Yeah, so there's, as you just said, the flexibility is a main source of the value here. It's not just being able to prepay service. And you can see why that would unlock demand. But how is flexibility built into your models? How much flexibility can you afford in terms of offering choice in the amount that someone can pay and the frequency in which they have to pay, and still be commercially viable? Anyone, yeah?
So with our model, we've deliberately priced it below the price of what people are currently spending on kerosene and mobile phone charging. So in Kenya, for example, our customers are saving up to 50% each week, which is a huge, huge saving for these people. And so that's a huge incentive for them to keep buying scratch cards every week, because if they stop, then they'd go back to spending more, and obviously they go back to using kerosene as well. However, we are understanding if our customers, for example, 1 week can't afford to pay for a scratch card due to, you know, having to buy medicine for one of their cows or something like that, or for family issues. Because we have a touch point once a week with every customer when they top up, we're able to see, you know, if customer X hasn't topped up for 2-3 weeks, and then what we can do is we have the flexibility to be in touch with our distributor in the country, and then they are then able to go in and speak with the customer and find out if there's something wrong, you know, if maybe they're not understanding something about the product or whatever it is. And we typically sort of have about a 4-week window in which we would then sort of, you know, go and see if there's something wrong. So I think that's really key in terms of, you know, understanding our customers and supporting them in terms of the whole, you know, rent to own process.
Yeah, and for those of our partners that have chosen a per kilowatt hour model, I mean, a lot of our product is in mini grid. So if it's a per kilowatt hour model, you basically, the flexibility is the more you want to spend, the more power you can get. So that's one of the advantages of mini grids over, obviously, over discrete products, but it's also built into our payment system.
Lesley, what are the increments that power is sold in for your systems?
Yeah, I mean, so our customer, because we're actually starting to license our pay-as-you-go technology to other manufacturers, our customers really, those distributors and the manufacturers who know their customer best, actually choose exactly what the pricing on those products look like. So we have rent-to-own, you know, we do offer per usage pricing. I'd say our standard is like roughly $1.50 a week usage pricing, so they can use it as much or as little during that week, and it shuts off after that week. But we've seen, people disappear for several weeks at a time. We don't get payments, and then we get a large chunk of payment, 2 to 3 weeks later. So it's really interesting. I'm a big proponent actually for rent to own, because you see people paying a lot faster than if they were just paying the base price. So it's good for everyone's cash flow. And some customers have the buying power to purchase that product pretty much outright. And a big thing that we see is actually just lack of trust in solar products. And pay-as-you-go really gets over that hump, because you can actually acquire a solar product for a low down payment, you use it for a couple weeks, you're completely hooked, there's no going back, and then you pay for that product outright. So just flexibility in payments enables all sorts of buying powers to utilize pay-as-you-go for how they need it.
So there's a big difference between your three companies in that you're primarily B2B companies that are selling to energy companies, or you're basically, your customer is the product manufacturer, where you actually have a network of retailers on the ground. In both cases, though, in terms of your distributors and how Azuri field staff do it, how do you assess customers? How is it that you're able to select a customer that you think will likely pay you back? What's the methodology for that?
So I think there's two things. Crucial to us, actually, first step is finding the right distributor. I think people were talking earlier about, we have obviously lots of people that want to distribute our product, but it's important for us to make sure we're working with the right partners who have the rural reach and also the capability to grow their business, because we're wanting to create enterprise development on the ground, and if they're creating successful businesses, then everyone in the value chain is earning, and the customer's going to keep buying the scratch cards, and we're going to be making our profit as well. And we find that it's very important that we provide a lot of training for our distributors in the cloud, as Lesley also was referring to, so they have all the information required to, when they give the demonstration to new customers, for example. I was out in Uganda back at Easter, and we were going to a new village, and it was really crucial to get the women involved, for example, to make them understand the whole process of topping up, and to get their trust, and to work through local chiefs and the whole village structure from the word go. And in terms of vetting customers, I think a lot of it obviously is based on trust. And if people are spending money currently on kerosene and other products, they do have that disposable income to be buying our product. And we've found that it works very well, and it's just the whole end-to-end service thing that's really crucial throughout the whole process.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned that scratch cards, or the transactions based on scratch cards. How does that work, and who are the actual vendors for the scratch cards?
Okay, so as I was saying, we work with local partners in country, and so they might be a local entrepreneur or something, and then they will employ their own installers and scratch card sellers. So that we're basically growing local businesses as part of our whole supply chain. So they will be people potentially selling phone top-ups, mum and pop shops, places very rural. Obviously, we're working right in the middle of nowhere. So these are people that small retailers, that kind of thing.
Right. And if you could tell us a little bit about the transaction mechanism that you use with Angaza, which is pretty groundbreaking, and also very much related to how it is that you're able to offer this at such a low cost. So if you could explain a little bit how that works.
Sure. So it seems a bit magical, but again, keep in mind R2D2. But so basically, we integrate with mobile money platforms. That's why we're primarily focused on East Africa right now. So a customer can send in and place a payment for, let's say, 50 shillings. And that basically pings our cloud-based backend to initiate a voice call to that customer's phone. So that's all automated. It happens immediately. And once they receive that call, they actually answer it and hold it right next to the unit. And the phone actually speaks to the unit. There's a microphone inside here. The unit actually decodes those tones and applies the payment information. And then the unit has a speaker as well, and actually talks back through the phone and transmits usage data back to our backend. So essentially, we're just adding a speaker and a microphone into these products, which keeps our additional hardware costs very, very low. we're talking basically a little over $1. So Steve sort of introed, what if you could make a pay-as-you-go study light, which the cost of goods of a study light is under $5. So you can't add a lot of incremental cost if you enable some sort of technology-based pay-as-you-go inside of that. But we're really focused on, well, what if you can take the lowest cost technology-based pay-as-you-go to keep it automated, integrate with mobile money, and put it in even small entry-level products. We think that can be, very game-changing.
So Wanda, you have the Indigo device here as well. Could you just lead us through a little bit about what the process is of topping up or reactivating?
Okay, so our partner will go into someone's house. These are people rural, off-grid, using kerosene, candles, grass, even in South Sudan for lighting. And they will install the whole system. So they will install the solar panel on the roof, 2 lights inside, and the yellow box as well on the wall. And then the distributor will obviously talk through the customer, what they have to do every week, how it works, reassure them about, for example, in Sierra Leone, where we've recently started, customers were concerned about during the rainy season, would the panels still work, etc. So all these fears have to be reassured with our customers. And then basically they just buy one of our scratch cards once a week. I should say, sorry, that we usually charge a small installation fee of around $10 for the whole system. We find that the customer then values the product, so we find that works fine, they can afford that. And then every week they'll just buy one of our scratch cards for typically around $1.50 again, varies between territories. And they basically just scratch off the scratch panel on the back, and with their mobile phone send that code and also the serial number on their unit to our gateway, and we send them back a one-time passcode which they then type into their unit here and then turn it on, and they get about 8-9 hours of light a day, and they can charge their phone. And then it's done on a time basis, so after a week the unit will automatically shut off. And we find that works very well. As you were saying, in terms of if people have more disposable income at a certain time, they might want to buy, say, 4 scratch cards, they can put them all on at once, and then it's incremental, so that will sort of be a month's worth of credit. So in Kenya, if it's a good crop, people tend to do that, to load up their units so that they can guarantee it's working.
So one big difference between all your companies are also the types of customers that you serve. I think there's some different segments that are each addressed. I know, Mitra, you have a very broad sort of agnostic, it seems. It could be applied to many different contexts. But if you could each talk a little bit about, I guess, kind of paint a picture, I guess, of your intended end user in terms of their income and level of usage.
Well, we have a very wide range, obviously, because it depends a lot on our partners. In Peru and Zambia during the trials, they're talking about people who are buying about, it's like a 100 watts system per house, roughly. So the first, like a kilowatt between 10 houses or that kind of range. So these are slightly higher income in Zambia. In Peru, they're actually very low, really base of the pyramid, and they're not using all the power. Our partner made a mistake, in my opinion, on that. And supplied too much capacity for the customer base that was there. In India, the customer base for our first mini-grid there is going to be 80 people who have the grid, but classically, as for India, the grid cable is put in, which means that the politician got their brownie points for installing it, but it's almost never energized. And our partner there is putting in a parallel mini-grid, 12-volt mini-grid, that supplies just lighting and phone charging to those customers, and they're going to be supplying a fixed 60 watt hours per day energy source that people either use or lose. So it's a backup to the grid, but there's enough demand for it that they've got the customers to buy it. And these are really low end. This is, the $1 a week range of customer. So we see a huge range, not down to the really base of where they're buying one lamp, where cheaper technology is more appropriate. It's the people are slightly moving up the energy ladder a little.
I'll say one thing which I think that Azuri really pioneered is this concept of the energy escalator, like you guys call it. And this sort of goes back to your earlier question too about how do we vet customers we sell to. We're thinking a lot about a customer who's never owned a solar product, you sell them an entry-level solar product, And suddenly they have a repayment history with that particular unit, and you give them a credit history. So you can look back on that same customer, you turn that relationship into a long-term relationship now with the customer, and you can then sell them a 10-watt product because you have a lot more trust that they'll repay the product. And again, they have a history with you. So answering that question and the current question, I think that not one particular customer is going to stay at one particular $1.50 a week tier for their entire life. They're really going to move up and get the aspirational energy that they want.
Go ahead and describe the energy escalator, because it is a really interesting part of your model. It's about graduating people to higher levels of service. So how exactly does that work, actually, Azuri?
Okay. So in terms of our customers, they're typically earning around $3 to $5 a week. Typically small holders, they might have small holding, or people have a little shop, for example. And what we did with the energy escalator was to really sort of to listen to what our customers want. So when we did a lot of research, we found that customers don't just want light. Light is great, and it's a great starting point, but they have the same aspirations as you or I. They want the latest technology in the future. It's amazing when I've been out there that 40% of Africans are under the age of 14, I think it is, and they're much better than I am with phones and technology, and they want the latest things. So we started thinking, what can we do to provide these things to them, and how can we extend just beyond lighting and actually provide access to energy rather than just access to lighting. And so we developed this concept called the energy escalator, whereby our customers start off on a very affordable product, which is this one, Indigo Duo it's called, with the 2 lights and mobile phone charging, and then after a period of time, around 18 months, they can then choose to either buy out or upgrade, literally lift it up to the next level, which will have 4 lights and a radio and the phone charging as well. And it's this progressive, basically, home electrification. And what's amazed us is what you can do with such a small amount of power. People are very creative, and we have so much. We're used to having access to so much power in the West, but really, with very small amounts of power, what you can achieve and what you can, power now with low voltage TVs, etc., is very exciting for us, and we see it as a huge opportunity, and we see our model as something that really customers buy into from day one, and they want to upgrade. And recently, I think back in June, we had our first customers in West Kenya actually reach that point. They've gone through the whole process, and they're now wanting to actually buy out their system and also buy into the next one. So whereas we thought customers might just choose to upgrade, actually, interestingly, they might choose to actually buy out this one, keep it, and then also start the next one. So it's interesting culturally in terms of what people want. They don't want that, because if, for example, we would come in and replace that, refurbish it, give it to another customer to start off on the energy escalator again, but actually people want all of it, which is interesting.
I want to take a question from the audience in a second, but if you could just tell us actually, how high will that escalator go? What are you envisioning right now in terms of the types of levels of services that might actually be delivered through Azuri?
Sure. Well, we're very much focused on our current base level product. Getting that to scale, getting that to volume, improving that model, and that's really our sort of entry point that we're focusing on getting to scale. But in the future, obviously, there's the capacity to power low voltage TVs. The next product, as I said, is a radio. So we're very keen on helping our customers access the knowledge economy and really sort of leveling the playing field in that respect.
So we're going to take a question. Anyone here? We'll start with Steve. I'm going to just use the mic there so we can record it. Thanks.
To look really far into the future, is the future that all of these communities that you're selling to are going to be on mini-grids, or is it just going to be bigger and bigger systems in your own house? Is the end of the escalator in your own house, or is it a grid?
Mitra, take it away.
Obviously, we're agnostic on that, like we are on most things. Probably just to catch the theme. But International Energy Authority, I think, has probably pegged it right when they say of the people without energy now, 40% of that will come from grid extension. I think that number's high. 20% will come from pico solar, meaning lanterns and solar home systems, and 40% will come from mini grid. I think they're about right, and the reason is because the cost savings of going mini-grid are high enough that if you're doing 100% coverage in a village, then it probably makes sense to do mini-grid. But what size will that mini-grid will be? In India, it's going to be, a couple of hundred houses. It's going to be the size of a village. In Africa, it's going to be half a dozen houses, because generally in Africa, what we see in terms of the demographics is the clusters are smaller, and it doesn't make sense to run low-power cables over longer distances. So I think what we define as a mini-grid will be tiny in some cases. But I think most of it will be, 2/3 of it will be mini-grid. That's my opinion.
Right. Any other prognostications here that you'd like to?
I would just say in terms of, with mini-grid, I think there's mini-grid can't reach the whole area, so there's a place for our products that not all the houses are going to be reached with mini-grid anywhere. And I think with the pay-as-you-go model as well, it's great because we have that touch point once a week with each individual household, and the whole model is they have more access to technologies, and it becomes more important to obviously to maintain that model of them topping up once a week.
Or both as well. I mean, you can see as your products grow, this is something we're facing in India with electrification. The pattern of it's somewhat unpredictable from a producer side of it. But if a device that's large like that has a battery and storage in it, and if it can be compatible and AC compatible, it could be basically an inverter if the grid comes to town. So it could be used with it.
But don't confuse mini-grids with AC. Right.
Depends on if it's an AC mini-grid.
I mean, there's a lot of DC mini-grids, and
right.
We tend to see an assumption in some places, especially because a lot of the conversation around that is coming from people who are used to doing big defense, clinic, hospital, those kind of grids. And they're assuming AC, as opposed to assuming smaller grids providing that basic level of energy access. And then in Zambia, it's a DC grid, but all the houses have got TVs, because they've all got microinverters running in the house to provide the one thing in the house that in their case, they still need AC, because you can't buy DC TVs yet in Zambia.
Yeah.
So
let's take one more question, and then we'll move on to Carl. Do you have
These conversations all tend to be somewhat anecdotal and qualitative. Obviously, each of the companies that's been speaking is highly quantitative and data-driven. Is there a mechanism for an appropriately redacted sharing of, because there's actually now, if you added up all the data, there is a lot, but there is not a lot of it in any one place. So you can't really learn from the data of your competitors, and you obviously wouldn't want them to know it was you. But my question is there an available opportunity to begin gathering data from all the practitioners so that the space can become more evidence-based?
anyone have thoughts on that or no?
So two parts to that. Yes, I think there is, because I think while there are competitors in this space, this is such a big problem that it's a bit like the early days of the internet. We've got more to gain from collaborating with our competitors than we have from competing with them. This is such a huge space. There's going to be lots of winners. So certainly, in that answer, yes. I would throw out one question, because there's again, it's one of these, I think, these mantras that we hear in the West, but you never hear in the field, which is the value of data. In that, what's the value of data on individual BOP households? And is it worth what it costs you to collect it? That's one of those big questions. And I think there's a hidden assumption in the West that that data is worth collecting, because we do so much around direct marketing and stuff like that, that data is valuable and it's cheap to collect. Flip that around to people who are spending $1 a day and where the collection costs are much higher. And I think it's not proven yet that there's value in collecting data on individual households. There's a lot of value in data at the aggregate level.
And I was talking about at the aggregate level.
Yes, and I think,
what is the default rate with Model A versus in location
yes.
C versus the default rate with Model B in location F?
And that is very well worth having.
Maybe it's a question of source of financing too, because I know a lot of the grant-funded projects, they actually require you to put your data out for anyone to consume. Granted, that sort of rubs some private companies the wrong way, but I actually am a strong, I believe in that a lot, because there's been mistakes that have been made in the space that no one talks about that all of us could have learned from, could have saved a lot of money, a lot of time. So maybe, yeah, just maybe where is the financing coming from?
What are some of those actually that would be, what are some of the things that we've discovered as we've gone along that have been maybe some of the early assumptions that haven't quite checked out, or some of the early errors that were made either in design or implementation that you've learned from and adapted around? Or has everything gone perfectly? I'm sure.
There's lessons. Obviously, we learn plenty of lessons from the field, and any company that tells you they're going to go out and launch a product and not learn from their first deployment is probably that's the last deployment they're going to make. And we learned the biggest lessons we learned, of course, is things like, okay, do you depend on batteries that have been supplied to you by your partner? When often as not, those batteries are pulled out of another product and half dead already. There's a lot of practical things that make the difference. Who was it who said that in theory there's no difference between theory and reality there is? Very much, lessons learned in the field. One lesson we learned, for example, was keep your model very, very simple. One of our partners had a very complicated pricing model. The customers could not understand it. They were combining per day and per kilowatt pricing, and the customers were kind of thinking, how come I spend this much today and I get less power than I did when I bought it 2 days ago? Because they didn't understand that. And I think over making assumptions that your customers are both smarter and dumber than you ever thought, and in not the ways you expect in either case.
I guess one example too would be just what happens at point of sale in terms of customer education before they walk off with this pay-as-you-go unit.
Yeah.
Like that is the make or break of whether you get repayment on that unit. And for example, take a small kiosk owner who's selling this product. He or she may get their cut of the product right up front, so they don't really have a lot of skin in the game to actually make sure that end user knows how to use the product. So I know a lot of different people have tried a lot of different things at that point of sale. How do we incentivize that kiosk owner to be there? If the customer needs to come back and ask a question, like they're still there and their skin is still in the game. So I think that's one area.
They have to get a cut of the prepayment. The people who are, everyone in the chain has to have a cut of stuff moving forward, so that they're incentivized to create something that lasts for the lifetime of your prepayment.
So how does that work, though? Actually, in real terms, it's once understood. It's this very elegant solution that's very, very low cost. But it is, when you explained it to me, my mind was blown away. It's literally two objects talking to each other, having a conversation. So how does, particularly since you're not directly, you're working through distributors, your customers as a distributor, how do you ensure that knowledge transfer happens? What level of investment or training do you have to make in order for that retailer who's selling soap and all sorts of different things to suddenly be an articulate spokesperson on something so complicated and different as this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of just physical materials. I'm talking on behalf of our distributor, but these kiosk owners go through trainings where they touch and feel the product, they use it, they do the top-up process, and then they walk away with nice visual flow charts about what to teach the customer. I think they're incentivized long-term. Either they get a cut of the payments long-term, but they're also incentivized knowing that the happy end user will tell all the neighbors around, hey, go buy this product, and they're going to send them right back to buy more products from that kiosk owner, so they're going to make more money as they sell more products. So, I think a lot of it is actually strategically picking that small dealer too, because let's say they're an M-Pesa agent, and that customer is going to go back to the M-Pesa agent and whenever they want to top up their unit, and the dealer still gets a cut of each M-Pesa transfer. So thinking about what is their primary business and how does the solar product fit into their sales, and are they incentivized to stay in it?
Yeah. So one of the things that's also interesting is that when you think of PAYGO, there's the focus on how it unlocks demand, that it basically creates a financing mechanism for end users. But it also, talking to you, Mitra, and also talking to you, Lesley, it's clear that the whole solution that you have, the PAYGO mechanism is one part of a larger platform, and there's the other pieces, the energy hub and the back-end parts, that seem to be actually meant to kind of unlock supply or to really support these local businesses so that they can really track sales, help manage their supply chain. So can you talk a little bit about the other elements that aren't related to the direct transaction that are part of your solution? Either one. Yeah, go for it.
I mean, because we're a B2B model, right? I mean, it is about unlocking the ability for companies in the field to actually deliver power. The meter unlocks part of it, but the meter is only half the issue. I mean, the meter is what de-risks payments on the whole system. And de-risking is crucial to reducing costs. If you've got to send somebody out to collect a weekly payment every week, and you've got to go to everybody in the village to collect that money, your costs of doing that are going to have to be put into the cost of the product. And so therefore the product becomes unaffordable. But more importantly, the risk of that customer not being there. We talked to one potential partner who said, well, we send somebody out to the village and 8 people will turn up. Now the 2 that didn't turn up, we don't know if they're not turning up because there's really a problem. Let's say they got delayed in the fields or something, or if there's a problem because they're trying to avoid being there because they're avoiding paying. Right? So that's a cost that they have to bear. And the cost of going out and turning a product off or trying to retrieve a product from a village, if it fails, is a high cost. That risk is built into the cost of capital to them, it's built into their cost of operations, it's built into the whole supply chain. And I think that, to me, is the critical enabler. It enables people to play in this space.
Okay.
Quick comment on that. I hope people don't gasp, but you know, whenever everyone says the comment, distribution is the main challenge. If you can solve distribution, you can solve everything. I actually don't think it's that black and white. I think there's a lot of technical, basically offerings that you can develop that can make distribution that much easier. So I get really excited about all of this data that we're sitting on because we collect data from every product. So we provide basically a front-end web interface. We call it the Energy Hub, where our distributors can log in, see the real-time repayment profile on any unit, assess the percentage of light that customer is using versus the percentage of mobile phone charging. We give them the tools to actually assess trends across different groups of customers that they've sold to, so they can, in one region of Kenya, their sales are going really well, another region they're not going so well, default rates are higher. They can really try and pinpoint where in the supply chain something's going wrong in terms of that customer education or that knowledge transfer. So that's just a short way, long way of saying that I think technology can actually very elegantly solve a lot of these distribution problems, and a lot of it does come down to just cost. You need to minimize cost of distribution. You need to make it so you can automate customer service. You can assess what's wrong with the product from afar. We actually get data on how much power is going into the battery, for example. So we can tell if the customer is not actually putting their solar panel in full sun. So, I mean, that's just it raises a red flag on our system. We can automatically send an SMS to our customer and say, make sure your solar panel's in direct sun, which is actually a very common just user error that we see in regular solar products. So technology is awesome.
So that's done in an automated way, just to be clear. So if you're detecting that there's low-level production, that message will go out automatically. Interesting. Let's go ahead and take another question, actually, from the audience. Jeff?
Yeah, really intrigued by that combination of the diagnostic piece with the payment piece. We've been focused a lot in this discussion on the payment side, but do you see that diagnostic piece that you're offering as a driver for a lot of your distributors to purchase the technology? And as you're licensing your technology, particularly for some of the larger systems and maybe to Mitra as well, are you building this into, I typically think of the remote monitoring as part of maybe an inverter for a larger microgrid system, but is this a driver for this technology, and do you see eventually a convergence of the remote monitoring technologies that are being developed more in line with the inverters and some of these pay-as-you-go models for the larger systems?
Yeah, I mean, short answer, yes. I think it's a huge value add that technical pay-as-you-go has over traditional microfinance or traditional send someone into the village and collect repayments. And it's sort of a question in our head, what do we do with all this data? It's great that the distributor can optimize their sales channels off of this data, but then how do you even have this influence the larger picture of what off-grid energy is in Africa, for example? So let's brainstorm after what to do with all the data. But yeah, I think it's a huge driving factor.
And I would say it depends on what your cost of collecting that data is, right? Our individual systems obviously won't have monitoring because we're not assuming, you talked about mistakes earlier. One of the classic mistakes people make is assuming GSM at the home. You're assuming you've got mobile coverage where every user is. So getting that back channel is harder. So we don't make that assumption, but in our grid systems, we're partnering with a company that has monitoring technology that can be dialed into remotely to access the actual data on the mini grid. But it's a cost issue, right? We think it's important to make the cost of small mini grids affordable. So if you've got an expensive monitoring technology, and most monitoring technology in the field that does a good job is expensive, you're not going to apply it to a really small mini-grid. Once the grid gets above a certain size, and this is also not just the size of the grid, but how much it costs you to go out and take a look and see if it's broken, or how good your feedback systems are from the field. If you've got an agent sitting in the village, you don't need a monitor to tell you the system's up, because that agent's making a commission off every payment. If the grid goes down, they're going to call you, because if people can't get electricity, they're not going to be buying payments, right? So that human system may be just as good as an electronic system, which has cost you a few $100s, and that has had to be spread over the cost of all the houses. So it's one of these tricky things. There's no right answer to it. It's a complicated situation. It's very situation dependent.
So unfortunately, because we started late, we are going to have to wrap up on time in order to get back on schedule. But I would like to take another question. But before we do that, you know, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the challenges that you face. I mean, PayGo is a solution to a particular problem. You've also mentioned that the Energy Hub can optimize supply and can solve other distribution problems as well. But what are some of the big challenges that you still contend with on any level of your business right now that are, I guess, most important at this stage? Anyone? Yeah, please.
I think for us, the two main challenges are access to finance and distribution as well. With the access to distribution, we have developed, probably similar to Lesley, a very comprehensive cloud-based system which we're rolling out with our distributors and in providing the end-to-end service, and we're learning as we go. But I think with the access to working capital is a huge thing that could allow us to scale up even more rapidly than we are doing at the moment. So I think Carl mentioned this morning about being open to innovative financing mechanisms and different ways of financing. We're looking at philanthropic capital, particularly debt. Debt finance is crucial for us going forward. And you know, we're interested in actually creating a new asset class of distributed solar power. And I think it is important in terms of going forward for all of us in terms of communicating what we're doing. I was at the SE4 discussion yesterday at the UN Leaders Summit, and Chad Holiday and others were talking about that, the need to communicate what companies like ours are doing to the investor community so they have the confidence to invest and so that we can, you know, really make an impact. Because I think it's easy to reach like 1,000 customers, but to reach 100,000 is a massive gap. So that's the main challenge for us. But we're working towards, you know, for example, developing some innovative SPV models for organisations to provide debt into going forward.
If we had time, I'd love to discuss the details of that, but we'll have to do it over drinks after, I suppose. But if you have anything else to add to that as well, I know we've talked about the working capital constraint as a major issue for you as well. But
I mean, apart from same for us, equity, but not, and then working capital not for us but for our partners, and equity finance for ourselves. The valley of death of any startup in this space is once you've gone through your seed money and you're trying to raise equity to get yourself to the point where you can talk to the larger players. The other issue is, of course, we're working multiculturally, right? So dealing with the cultural constraints in any country is challenging. Luckily for us, of course, that's something our partners deal with, but we have to deal with a huge range of partners, everything from little NGOs through to much more established energy companies through to companies. Well, we're working with a pump manufacturer to integrate pay-as-you-go into water pumping, for example. So, you know, it's not just about energy, it's not just about electricity, as someone said, it's about services. So dealing with that range of partners is one of our interesting challenges that takes a lot of our bandwidth.
Yeah, if we had a few more minutes, we could talk the future of it, what this will look like in 5 years. And you just talked about one possible innovation is embedding PayGo in actual appliances as well, is a really exciting possible development. Do we have one more question that could be brief? Great. We do. Actually, please. Do we have the microphone? Or, we'll do both.
A very brief one. I love you, and I want to get married to you. But before we do so, is there? You know, I'm so worried if I.
Mitra, or which one are we talking about?
Well, that was my question. You know, it's all about cash flow and your models. Yeah, the major question I have, and again, I love you, is do we get our money back quicker or not? So what is your payback time on the products? And how many clients are actually defaulting? So not every week paying, but maybe, you know, a lot are not paying at all, or you have to get back the system. So I'm very happy to still hear some figures.
Please.
Well, how quickly do you get your money back? I mean, on our model, it depends on the price you set, right? I mean, one of our partners, you know, we were talking about availability of financing for partners. One of the difficulty is most people delivering the stuff in the field are having to raise money at ridiculously high rates over ridiculously short time frames. So they have to price the thing at a place where they get their money back in 2 years. If they don't do it in 2 years, they can't borrow the money. But that means, of course, a price point that's probably up around the $3 per kilowatt hour, right, over 2 years. So it sounds a lot, but in 2 years' time, the customer's going to own the system. So that's, it's up to you how fast you get your money back.
Wanda, Azuri has been at this longest and you know, has the largest numbers as a result. So are you seeing average payback periods that you could share in terms of how long does it usually take for people to pay these off?
Yeah, I mean, well, a significant thing for us was back in February when we had a £1 million loan from Barclays, which I think was a really key thing in terms of demonstrating commercial capital lending into organisations like ours. And again, I think it's a very fast payback time, and I think it depends on how it would work. But we're, as I said, looking at different financing mechanisms from loans, philanthropic, different ways of financing.
But in terms of the consumer payback periods, are you looking at 6 to 12 months?
Sorry, consumer payback is 18 months. But again, as in, it can be brought forward. It varies between countries. So we vary the scratch card price between territories down to 12 months, and that's what we'd like to get it as short as possible, obviously. But we started out around 18 months, but we're looking, different countries to get it sooner, and the customer can pay back sooner if they want to.
Right.
Sorry, is that on unit or on your bottom line?
On the unit, yeah. On the yeah.
Do we have just time for one more quick question? Great. Why don't we?
Very small clarification question. If you could talk about, we're talking about pay as you go. What about service as you go? It's clear when you're doing essentially the keeping them up the escalator, because then you're incentivized as a company to keep maintaining throughout the product range. What about when somebody pays off for the system? That system may have a life of 10, 15, 20 years. How are you structuring that ongoing maintenance piece? Thanks.
Lesley.
Well, we're not the distributor, so again, I'm speaking on our distributor's behalf. But I mean, usually pay-as-you-go products are thought of pretty similarly to non-pay-as-you-go solar home systems, for example. So it's in the distributors or our interest to make sure that the product is high quality, so it'll last throughout the repayment period, of course. But usually it comes with a similar warranty to normal solar products, and after that warranty is over, then the inherent servicing that comes with the product is over. So I'd say quality matters a lot more to pay-as-you-go products than it does to solar products. Unfortunately, that just is the case. So that's a long way of saying that it's just pretty similar to normal solar products in terms of the standard warranty period.
I'd say that on a solar home system, on a solar lantern, it's very different from on a mini grid. Like on a mini grid, even if the customer might be a community that's paying off over 3 years, or even individuals that are paying off their right to access, you've got to have a continual payment. Now, a continual payment may be a very small fraction of what they've been paying in those first 2 years, and it may not be possible to administer it. But the reality is most people are going to be working their way up the energy escalator anyway. So let's assume a family's been spending $2 a week. So they spent $100 a year. 2 years they spent $200, which is about the average cost per customer of minimal electrification. They're not going to suddenly go from $2 a week to nothing. They actually, what I think most people are seeing is that people's budget is what's consistent, not the amount of energy they receive. So if you give people an equivalent amount of energy to so many kerosene lights, they'll spend $2 on electricity versus $2 on kerosene. And now as they go up their ladder, they'll continue spending $2, but they own the first unit. So they'll keep spending $2 for a week for the next unit. And that, of course, can incorporate the service charge on the first thing they've bought. So I think that's the kind of payment process we've been recommending to our distributors, but of course it's up to them.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, though, is that, you know, in a service-based model, you have the provider is on the hook indefinitely to make sure that service is delivered, where the longer the life of the product, you know, relative to the payback period, you have that gap there. How do you ensure that there's going to be the ability to service that? So I think we've run out of time. There's a lot more that we just really scraped the surface of this, and next year when we do this again, I think we'll have some more interesting stuff to report. But I want to thank the panel for joining us and for the interesting conversation. Thank you for the great questions as well.